Electricity got cheaper to make. So why didn't your bill? In some of the windiest places on Earth, the cost to generate a megawatt hour from modern turbines is now among the lowest of any technology on the grid. Yet the number on your monthly statement still behaves like it's allergic to good news. That gap between cheap to produce and expensive to buy is the plot twist of the energy transition. And it starts with how wind power actually got so cheap and why your bill doesn't care. First, the good news is real. The levelized cost of energy for onshore wind, basically the all-in cost to build and run a turbine over its lifetime, sits near the bottom of the stack in independent analyses and has done so for years. In many cases, new wind can beat the operating cost of some existing fossil plants. That's not a marketing slogan, it's the math behind how developers, banks, and utilities decide what to build. Part of that cost drop is simply better machines. Turbines keep growing taller and wider, which helps them tap steadier winds. But the quiet revolution is inside the nacelle. Modern variable speed designs use power electronics to decouple the spinning hardware from the 50 to 60 Hz heartbeat of the grid. Older machines had to spin at very narrow speed ranges tied to grid frequency. Newer ones don't. That means they can generate meaningful power from gentler winds that used to be too slow to bother with. You can see it in the cut-in numbers. Lots of current models begin producing around 2.5 to 3 meters per second, which is a breezy day, not a gale. And because many full converter and DFIG designs can operate efficiently across a wider range of speeds, they smooth out production over the year instead of living and dying by windy weekends. In plain English, more hours making power, fewer hours sitting out. Ireland is a great example of what this looks like at system scale. The grid there routinely pushes world-leading shares of wind, but it has to manage stability when huge chunks of supply are non-synchronous, inverter-based, like wind and solar. The DS3 program raised the ceiling on how much of this non-synchronous generation the system can handle at any instant, hitting 75% and working toward 95%, which effectively creates more space on the grid for cheap wind to show up. That's a technical, not political breakthrough. Grid codes, system services, and smarter controls made it possible. Texas shows the same story from a different angle. ERCOT, the state's grid, leans heavily on wind and increasingly solar. On blustery days, wholesale prices can tumble into the negative because the system has more generation than it can use or move. That's not rare anymore. But the flip side is just as real. Prolonged lulls in wind still happen, and when they do, fossil plants step in and the price responds. In 2024, US wholesale prices fell mostly because natural gas got cheaper and storage grew. A reminder that the gas price tail still wags the electricity dog in many markets. When the wind howls, you see bargains in the wholesale market. When it stalls, or when demand surges, gas peakers and combined cycle units start calling the shots again. So with wind this cheap and this available, why aren't your bills lower? Because your bill is not the wholesale price. It's a bundle of costs stacked on top of it. Start with the way markets set prices. Most competitive power markets clear using marginal pricing, where the last, most expensive plant needed to meet demand sets the price for everyone in that interval. Wind and solar bid in at nearly zero fuel cost, so they run whenever available. But if the final unit needed is a gas plant, the gas plant's cost sets the price. In Europe, studies found gas sets the clearing price a big share of the time, which is why electricity rode the gas roller coaster during the crisis. Ireland's market and Britain's, like ERCOT's in Texas, are variations on that theme. Result: your tariff often mirrors the cost of gas even as wind's share climbs. Next layer: backup isn't free. You can't run a modern grid on averages. You have to survive the worst hour of the worst day. That's why many regions run capacity mechanisms, basically paying plants to be available, not just to produce. In the all-island Irish market, the capacity remuneration mechanism pays providers for dependable capacity years ahead of time. Britain's capacity market does the same thing. These payments keep flexible gas units solvent, so they're there when the wind dies, or a big interconnector trips. Consumers ultimately fund that insurance policy, and it doesn't disappear just because windy Tuesdays are cheap. The grid itself is another big slice of your bill. Wind is often built where wind lives: coasts, plains, the North Sea, not where people live. Moving that energy requires massive transmission build-outs. When the wires lag behind the turbines, operators pay constraint and balancing costs, curtailing cheap wind in one place and paying more expensive generators elsewhere to ramp up. Britain has spent billions per year on balancing and constraints as wind growth outran north-to-south transfer capacity. Scotland's bottlenecks, in particular, have been pricey. Texas has a similar dynamic when congested lines strand cheap generation out west while cities pay more. Those costs don't show up as wholesale price on a graph. They show up on your network charges. And new transmission projects, like Britain's proposed multi-decade upgrade plan, are recovered from consumers over time. It's not glamorous, but poles and wires are why your lights work. If you're enjoying the video so far, don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps the channel reach more people who nerd out about this stuff. Storage should be the bridge from cheap when it's windy to cheap whenever you need it. And it's finally scaling. Texas now leads the US in grid batteries by a wide margin, passing even California. The build-out over 2024 to 2025 was explosive, and it's still accelerating. Batteries soak up oversupply and sell it back at the evening peak, flattening those wild price swings and reducing the number of hours when gas sets the price. Ireland is earlier in its storage journey, but it's adding its first longer duration projects and plotting reforms to pay for the fast grid services that batteries excel at. Exactly the stuff that lets operators run more non-synchronous renewables without getting nervous. Storage isn't free, but it converts cheap sometimes into cheaper more often, and that's how you move the retail needle. Hedging and regulation also put a thick filter between wholesale wins and your personal bill. Retail suppliers don't buy all your power at 2 p.m. for 2 p.m. They hedge over months to avoid getting obliterated by a single price spike. That's good for stability, but it builds in a lag. Drops in wholesale prices take time to reach your plan, and in some countries, the regulator's price cap is updated quarterly or seasonally, not minute by minute. Add in taxes and policy levies, like Ireland's PSO levy that flips from charging customers to crediting them, depending on market conditions. And you start to see why wind was cheap this weekend doesn't instantly mean my bill shrank this month. Timing and policy matter. There's also the uncomfortable truth that cheap wind can be, well, too cheap at the wrong time. When a storm front pushes 70% of national demand from wind for hours, prices crash, sometimes below zero. If the grid can't move that surplus to customers or to storage, operators literally pay generators not to produce, then pay other generators elsewhere to turn on. It sounds absurd because it is, but it's cheaper than breaking the system. Until transmission catches up and storage is everywhere, these negative price days won't translate into negative retail bills. Residential rates are engineered to be calm on purpose. Big industrial users with flexible contracts can feast on those hours. Households, not so much. All of this doesn't mean wind's cheapness is fake. It means we're in the messy middle of an infrastructure transition where the market still prizes flexibility from fossil plants. The network is playing catch-up, and the retail layer is designed to be boring. The fix isn't to stop building wind. It's to finish the rest of the machine. Build the wires to move it. Build the batteries to shape it. And tune the rules so zero-fuel resources don't spend half their lives waiting for a line outage to clear. You can already see the contours of that future. Interconnectors are knitting grids together so surplus wind in one country becomes dinner-time power in another. Ireland's 500-megawatt Greenlink cable to Wales came online in 2025, and the 700-megawatt Celtic interconnector to France is under construction. These highways let markets arbitrage weather, sell wind when it's gusty at home, buy hydro or nuclear when it's calm. More cross-border capacity won't make headlines, but it absolutely trims the peaks and fills the valleys that your bill hates. Markets are evolving too. Britain just finished a bruising debate over scrapping a single national price for zonal pricing. The government ultimately kept a national market but promised reforms to cut constraint costs and speed connections. Basically a political way of acknowledging that the grid, not the turbines, is the bottleneck. On the consumer side, contracts for difference for new renewables can return money to suppliers, and ultimately to households, when wholesale prices spike above a project's strike price. It's not magic, It's a hedge embedded in policy. These are the kinds of tweaks that move cheap wind from the spreadsheet into your wallet. Zoom out and the pattern is clear. Turbines got smarter and cheaper. Grids let more of them connect. Storage is rising to smooth the rough edges. But prices that you and I pay still reflect a system built for scarcity and synchronized spinning masses. Not for a world where fuel is free, but timing is everything. That's why bills haven't fallen the way tweets suggest. It's not a conspiracy, it's plumbing. And the plumbers, engineers, regulators, operators are busy. Here's the optimistic part. As batteries scale, interconnectors multiply and transmission finally expands. The most expensive plant will set the price less often, and the retail layer will have less volatility to protect you from. When the panic premium fades, the structural cheapness of wind has a cleaner path into retail tariffs. In other words, falling wholesale costs will stop getting taxed by avoidable constraints, emergency reserves, and crisis hedging. Give the grid the tools to be flexible without fossil fuel, and the bill follows. We aren't at the finish line. We're in that awkward middle chapter where the new thing works, the old thing won't leave, and the glue between them is still drying. But the direction is set. Cheap wind is already here. The job now is to make the rest of the system behave like it. You'll find all the sources I used linked in the description below. And if the way we hide complexity in plain sight fascinates you, our last video on undercover phone antennas, why some grips killed reception and how 5G added those tiny windows you've probably never noticed, pairs perfectly with this one. The link's right down there.